Track 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for putting up with that. He's amazing. His name is Nabil, and he works alongside with me doing all of our creative work and making sure photographs, video, music is always perfect. So thank you. I'm so excited to be in your beautiful city. We got here last night, so I haven't had the opportunity yet to go around and see the city, but we fought for a day off tomorrow so that I can go out and see everything and eat everything. I've heard the food is fantastic. So today I'm going to be sharing a lot of poetry from my 2 books, and I'll be sharing spoken word poetry. Can I get a show of hands for how many people have been to a poetry slam or an open mic night? Okay, wow, that's a great amount. Okay, so I have a question for you. When you're at a poetry slam and the poet is saying something and you're really, really enjoying it, how do you tell them that? You snap your fingers, exactly. So if I am sharing a piece and you really, really like it, you need to let me know. So snap your fingers, because I'm up here, I'm giving you energy, and when you're gonna give me energy with all your snapping and your clapping, don't be afraid to even stand up and go, yeah. I love feeling like all of you are on stage up here with me. It's fantastic. It's lonely up here, and it's a really big stage, so let's fill it with all of our voices. Why not? Who's excited to hear some poetry? Amazing. All right, I'm honored to end off this beautiful day, and we're gonna start with, we'll be doing love poetry, we'll be doing some heartache poetry about grief and loss, and then we'll end off with my favorite kind, which is, you know what, I'll just let you wait for it. Sometimes I give everything away too soon, so. The first one is called What Love Looks Like. What does love look like? The therapist asks 1 week after the breakup. And I'm not sure how to answer her question except for the fact that can everyone hear me? Okay, just making sure. Let's start again. Sometimes I've done an entire show and then everybody tells me afterwards that we had no idea what you were saying, the music was so loud. What does love look like? The therapist asks 1 week after the breakup. And I'm not sure how to answer her question except for the fact that I thought love looked so much like you. And that's when it hit me. That's when I realized how naive I had been to place an idea so beautiful onto the image of a person, as if anybody on this entire earth could encompass all love represented, as if this emotion that 7 billion people tremble for would look like a 5'11", medium-sized, brown-skinned guy who likes eating frozen pizza for breakfast. So what does love look like? The therapist asks again, this time interrupting my thoughts mid-sentence, and at this point, I'm about to get up and walk right out the door, except I paid far too much money for this hour. So instead, I take a piercing look at her. The way you look at someone when you're about to hand it to them. Lips pursed tightly, preparing to launch into conversation. Eyes digging deeply into theirs, searching for all the weak spots you most definitely know they have hidden somewhere. Hair being tucked behind the ear as if you have to physically prepare for a conversation on the philosophies, or rather disappointments, of what love looks like. Well, I tell her, I don't think love is him anymore. If love was him, he would be here, wouldn't he? If he was the one for me, wouldn't he be the one sitting across from me? If love was him, it would have been simple. I think I just wanted something that was bigger than myself, and when someone showed up that could probably fit the part, I made it very much my intention to make him my counterpart. And I lost myself to him. He took and he took, wrapped me in the word special until I was so convinced he had eyes only to see me, hands only to feel me, a body only to be with me. Oh, how he emptied me. Well, how does that make you feel? Interrupts the therapist. Well, I said, it kind of makes me feel like shit. Maybe we're all looking at it wrong. Maybe we think that it's something to search for out there, something that's supposed to crash into us on our way out an elevator, or slip into our chair at a cafe somewhere, or appear at the end of an aisle at the bookstore looking the right amount of sexy and intellectual. But I think love starts here. Everything else is just desire and projection of all our wants, needs, and fantasies. But those externalities could never work out if we didn't turn inward and figure out how to love ourselves in order to love other people. Love is not our actions. No, love does not look like a person. Love is our actions. Love is giving all we can, even if it's just a bigger slice of cake. It's understanding we have the power to hurt one another, but we are gonna do everything in our power to make sure we don't. And when someone shows up saying that they're gonna provide sweetness as you do, but their actions seem to break you rather than build you, love is knowing who to choose. Thank you. You are all so polite. Even when I heard the snapping and the clapping, it was just so polite. Thank you. So sweet. All right, let's go into, there's a poem in Milk and Honey. It's on page 59, and it's one of my, I really enjoy it because I think that when it comes to partnership, it really sort of describes a partnership that I think is ideal. But it makes me laugh because all of my friends, or, you know, I'm in line or I'm signing books and everybody in line is like, okay, listen, like I'm a really big fan. So you're going to come to my wedding, right? It's like next July. This is the city and I need you to read this one. And so I always laugh and I always say, yes, for sure, I'll be there. Just email my manager and we'll get it in the books. But it's almost near impossible to do so. I do not want to have you to fill the empty parts of me. I want to be full on my own. I want to be so complete. I could light a whole city. And then I want to have you, because the two of us combined would set it on fire. Page 169. I cannot contain myself any longer. I ran to the ocean in the middle of the night and confessed my love for you to the water. As I finished telling her, the salt in her body became sugar. So a lot of the poems, thank you. A lot of the poems in The Sun and Her Flowers, chapter 4, were inspired by the music that I usually listen to when I write, and that music is a lot of like Sufi music, a lot of folk Punjabi music, and I think it's some of the most beautiful, beautiful music and poetry in the world. And it inspires me so much because I always tell my friends back home who only speak English, I'm like, listen, you have no idea. Like, I know, I get it. I love Adele and I love Beyonce too, but these poets, they're able to say things in this language that English cannot even begin to comprehend. And so I make it my personal mission sometimes to try and just do that, because like, you listen to like a Surinder Kaur song, and it tears your heart apart. And I'm like, okay, how do I do this in English? How do I create this beautiful, romantic, passionate story? And I try to do that in chapter 4. This morning, I told the flowers what I would do for you, and they blossomed. Yeah, it's done, thanks. Some of the poems are really short. This one is not. 189. God must have kneaded you and I from the same dough, rolled us out as one on the baking sheet, must have suddenly realized how unfair it was to put that much magic in one person and sadly split that dough in two. How else is it that when I look in the mirror, I am looking at you? That when you breathe, my own lungs fill with air? That we just met, but we've known each other our whole lives if we were not made as one to begin with? I really have to like find a solution to not be like jumping back and forth through the 2 books, so. All right, so I love to write about love. Who doesn't? I mean, I feel like, who doesn't love love? But when there's love, there's also sometimes loss, and let's explore that for a little bit. This piece is called Selfish. I will tell you about selfish people. Even when they know they will hurt you, they walk into your life to taste you because you are the type of being they don't want to miss out on. You are too much shine to not be felt. So when they have gotten a good look at everything you have to offer, when they have taken your skin and your hair and your secrets with them, when they realize how real this is, how much of a storm you are, and it hits them, that is when the cowardice sets in. That is when the person you thought they were, it was replaced by the sad reality of what they are. That is when they lose every fighting bone in their body and leave after saying, "You will find better than me." And you will stand there naked with half of them still hidden somewhere inside you and sob, asking them why they did it, why they forced you to love them when they had no intention of loving you back, and they'll say something along the lines of, "I just had to try. I had to give it a chance. It was you after all." But that isn't romantic. It isn't sweet. The idea that they were so engulfed by your existence that they had to risk breaking it for the sake of knowing they weren't the ones missing out. Your existence meant that little next to their curiosity of you. And that is the thing about selfish people. They gamble entire beings, entire souls to please their own. 1 second, they're holding you like the world in their lap. And then the next, they've belittled you to a mere picture, a moment, something of the past. 1 second, they swallow you up and whisper how they want to spend the rest of their life with you. But the moment they sense fear, they're already halfway out the door without having the nerve to let you go with grace, as if the human heart means that little to them. And after all of this, after all of the taking, the nerve, isn't it sad and funny how people have more guts these days to undress you with their fingers than they do to pick up the phone and call and apologize for the loss. And this is how you lose her. All right. Did you think I was a city big enough for a weekend getaway? I am the town surrounding it, the one you've never heard of but always pass through. There are no neon lights here, no skyscrapers or statues, but there is thunder, for I make bridges tremble. I am not street meat, I am homemade jam, thick enough to cut the sweetest thing your lips will touch. I am not police sirens, I am the crackle of a fireplace. I would burn you and you still couldn't take your eyes off me, 'cause I would look so beautiful doing it you'd blush. I'm not a hotel room. I am home. I'm not the whiskey you want. I'm the water you need. So don't come here with expectations and try to make a vacation out of me. All right, let's move on to something a little fun. All right. Okay, so this poem is called, it's from The Sun and Her Flowers, and it's called The Art of Growing, and I wrote it for my 12-year-old self. I didn't have an older sister growing up who was there to show me the ropes and sort of beat up anyone along the way who tried to bully me. So, you know, I kind of did it for myself like 10 years later. I felt beautiful until the age of 12, when my body began to ripen like new fruit. And suddenly, the men looked at my newborn hips with salivating lips. The boys, they didn't want to play tag at recess. They wanted to touch all the new and unfamiliar parts of me. The parts I didn't know how to wear, didn't know how to carry, tried to bury in my ribcage. Boobs, they said. And I hated that word. Hated that I was embarrassed to say it, that even though it was referring to my body, it didn't belong to me, it belonged to them, and they repeated it like they were meditating upon it. Boobs, he said. Let me see yours. There is nothing worth seeing here but guilt and shame. I try to rot into the earth below my feet, but I am still standing 1 foot across from his hooked fingers, and when he charges to feast on my half moons, I bite into his forearm and decide that I hate this body, that I must have done something terrible to deserve it. So when I go home, I tell my mother that the men outside were starving. She tells me I must not dress with my breasts hanging, or the boys will get hungry if they see fruit. Said I should sit with my legs closed like a woman oughta, or the men will get angry and fight. Said I can avoid all of this trouble if I just learn to act like a lady. But the problem is, that doesn't even make sense. I can't wrap my head around the fact that I have to convince half the world's population that my body is not their bed. I am busy learning the consequences of womanhood when I should be learning science and math instead. I like cartwheels and gymnastics, so I can't imagine walking around with my thighs pressed together like they're hiding a secret, as if the acceptance of my own body parts will invite thoughts of lust in their heads. I will not subject myself to their ideologies, because slut-shaming is rape culture, and virgin praising is rape culture, and I am not a mannequin in the window of your favorite shop. You can't dress me up or throw me out when I am worn, because you are not a cannibal, and your actions are not my responsibility, so you will control yourself. And so, the next time I go to school and the boys, they hoot at my backside, I push them down, foot over their necks, and defiantly say, boobs. And the look in their eyes is priceless. Thank you. I thought that one might wake all of us up. Okay. Let's do this. Okay. My issue with what they consider beautiful is that their concept of beauty centers around excluding people. I find hair beautiful. When a woman wears it like a garden on her skin, that is the definition of beauty. Big, hooked noses pointing upward to the sky like they're rising to the occasion. Skin the color of earth my ancestors planted crops on to feed a lineage of women with thighs thick as tree trunks, eyes like almonds deeply hooded with conviction. The rivers of Punjab flow through my bloodstream, so you can't tell me my women are not as beautiful as the ones in your country. All right. Let's do this one. And then I'm just going to have you all tell me which ones are your favorites. I want to apologize to all the women I've called pretty before I've called them intelligent or brave. I'm sorry I made it sound as though something as simple as what you're born with is the most you have to be proud of, when your spirit has crushed mountains. From now on, I will say things like, you are resilient and you are extraordinary. Not because I don't think you're pretty, but because I realize that you are so much more than that. Timeless. They convinced me I only had a few good years left before I was replaced by a girl younger than me. As though men yield power with age, but women grow into irrelevance. They can keep their lies, for I have just gotten started. I feel as though I just left the womb. My 20s are the warm-up for what I'm really about to do. Wait till you see me in my 30s. Now that will be a proper introduction to the nasty, wild woman in me. How can I leave before the party started? Rehearsals begin at age 40. I ripen with age. I do not come with an expiration date. And now, for the main event, curtains up at 50. Let's begin the show. Thank you. I'm going to read some poems about my mom. All right. I think for so much of your adolescence life, or I mean, I can't speak for everyone but mine, there's so much like tension within a household sometimes between parent and child, especially the daughter and mom. So there's sometimes like a constant war between the walls of your home. And then suddenly you grow up and things just flip and you see how much of a warrior she is and how many sacrifices she's had to make, and suddenly you feel like a total buffoon. And you're like, oh my God, what have I done? Why did I torture you for the last 10 years? And how am I going to make up for that? What if there isn't enough time to give her what she deserves? Do you think if I begged the sky hard enough, my mother's soul would return to me as my daughter so I can give her the comfort she gave me my whole life? Thank you. Okay. Are there any that I haven't read that you'd like me to read? Yes. This one. Okay. You must remember it too, how the rest of the city slept while we sat awakened for the first time. We hadn't touched yet, but we managed to travel in and out of each other with our words, our limbs dizzying with enough electricity to form half a sun. We drank nothing that night, but I was intoxicated. I went home and thought, are we soulmates? Thank you. Which one? 84? Okay, I like this one. A never-ending search. My eyes make mirrors out of every reflective surface I pass, searching for something beautiful looking back. My ears fish for compliments and praise, but no matter how far they go looking, nothing is enough for me. I go to clinics and department stores for pretty potions and new techniques. I've tried the lasers, I've tried the facials, I've tried the blades and expensive creams. For a hopeful minute they fill me. They make me glow from cheek to cheek. But as soon as I feel beautiful, their magic disappears suddenly. Where am I supposed to find it? I am willing to pay any price for a beauty that makes heads turn every moment, day and night. Thank you. Okay, so we'll end off with, which one? Oh. The Art of Being Empty. Okay. You know it better than I do. You should just come up here and perform it. The Art of Being Empty. Okay, and after this one, I promise I have to end it because I'm pretty sure that I'm over my time. But it's what you get to do when you're the last one, right? Emptying out of my mother's belly was my first act of disappearance. Learning to shrink for a family who likes their daughters invisible was the second. The art of being empty is simple. Believe them when they say you are nothing. Repeat it to yourself like a wish. I am nothing, I am nothing, I am nothing so often. The only reason you know you're still alive is from the heaving of your chest. So last but not least, thank you for being such a warm and calm audience. I just feel so mellow, so thank you. This last poem is called Broken English, and I want to go back to that earlier poem where I told you about kind of terrorizing my mother's life for the longest time as a teenager. And one thing, when we moved over to Canada when I was still a child, I was born here, and then we left, and I was so obsessed naturally with trying to fit into the Western culture over there. You know, blonde hair, blue eyes, like perfect English. And I didn't learn English at home because my parents didn't know English. And so when we would like go to the grocery store, my mom would be shouting out, you know, in her accent or in Punjabi, and I'd be like, oh my God, Mom, you're like so embarrassing. Like, come on. Can't you just try and fit in? And she would just only speak louder and embarrass me more. And it's so funny because I used to think she's like a form of embarrassment, and trust me, like every immigrant child like feels that way down there. It's just like, oh, like could you stop? Could you like try? Like, why can't we just assimilate? And it's so funny because like through your teenage years, you spend so much time trying to assimilate, and then through your 20s, you spend so much time sort of trying to prove to the West how suddenly different you are. And so Broken English is like so important to me because it pays homage to the sacrifices that I feel people have to make when they pick up from whatever home they're at and they leave everything behind, land, money, culture, language, and they arrive at a foreign place, foreign in every single way, and they start over, especially in our cultures where, you know, raising children is like, you do it within community. And how does one do that all by themselves when you have generations of doing it this one way, and suddenly you're doing it alone? So this is called Broken English. I think about the way my father pulled the family out of poverty without knowing what a vowel was. And my mother raised 4 children without being able to construct a perfect sentence in English. A discombobulated couple that landed in the new world with hopes that left the bitter taste of rejection in their mouths. No family, no friends, just man and wife. 2 university degrees that meant nothing. 1 mother tongue that was broken now. 1 swollen belly with the baby inside. A father worrying about jobs and rent, 'cause no matter what, this baby was coming. And they thought to themselves, for a split second, was it worth it to put all of our money into the dream of a country that is swallowing us whole? And Papa looks at his woman's eyes and sees loneliness living where the iris was. Wants to give her a home in a country that looks at her with the word visitor wrapped around their tongue. On their wedding day, she left an entire village to be his wife. And now she left an entire country to be a warrior. And when the winter came, they had nothing but the heat of their own bodies to keep the coldness out. And so, like 2 brackets, they faced one another to hold the dearest parts of them, their children, close as they turned a suitcase full of clothes into a life and regular paychecks to make sure the children of immigrants did not hate them for being the children of immigrants. They worked too hard. You can tell by their hands, their eyes were begging for sleep, but our mouths were begging to be fed. And that is the most artistic thing I have ever seen. It is poetry to these ears that have never heard what passion sounds like. And my mouth is full of likes and ums when I look at their masterpiece, because there are no words in the English language that can articulate that kind of beauty. I can't wrap them in 26 letters, and I can't compact their existence into 26 letters and call it a description. I tried once, but their adjectives needed to describe them don't even exist. So instead, I ended up with pages and pages full of words followed by commas and more words and more commas, only to realize that there are some things in the world so infinite they could never use a full stop. So how dare you mock your mother when she opens her mouth and broken English spills out? Don't be ashamed of the fact that she split through countries to be here so you wouldn't have to cross a shoreline. Her accent is thick like honey. Hold it with your life. It's the only thing she has left from home. Don't you stomp on that richness. Instead, hang it up on the walls of museums next to Dali and Van Gogh. Her life is brilliant and tragic. Kiss the side of her tender cheek. She already knows what it sounds like to have an entire nation laugh when she speaks. She is more than our punctuation and language. We might be able to paint pictures and write stories, but she made an entire world for herself. So how is that for art? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so open and having me on stage. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're just going to hang around for 15 minutes. We're going to do a Q&A, right? Yeah.
We'll do a Q&A and we'll have a small, very brief, short conversation with Rupi, which Josh will moderate. Josh, we are ready when you are. That was the performance. This is the conversation bit. Thank you.
Wow. So what a performance. And yes, we're completely and utterly flawed. I was sitting there backstage listening to this incredible performance, and I was thinking to myself that if Instagram is today's village square, Rupi Kaur is its biggest bard. And
Thank you.
I did want to ask you, Rupi, that, you know, with your poetry, when you bring so much of your village, your nation, your land, and your new land, and your experience, and this desire to fit in, and when it's reviewed by critics and seen in the lens of either pop or in the lens of critical poetry paradigm, do they miss out on the fact that you are actually a folk artist, and what you are is a product with the heritage of Punjabi folk music, Punjabi folk poetry, translated really in today's digital terms and therefore hugely popular? Do they understand that perhaps it's Kabir and Bulle Shah more than anything else that Rupi Kaur is all about?
So it's like a really, I think that's for somebody to fully understand the poetry, I think one would have to sit down and we would need 2 cups of tea and hours of conversation. And so I totally I get that and I agree. In terms of critics from the West, I don't think that although I write in the English language, you can't analyze or look and dissect the poetry just from the Western lens, because the inspirations that I take from and what I listen to and where I draw from and what I was surrounded with and by the majority of my life wasn't with Western culture. Although I lived in that world, it was the inspiration that came from the four walls of my own home, where, you know, I spent like 7 years doing kirtan and reading Sikh poetry, you know, and sitting around in the living room with my family and my parents, and, you know, spending hours and hours dissecting 2 lines or just like 2 words, for God's sake, right? And it goes back to even when I was talking about chapter 4 and how that was so much inspired by music, folk Punjabi music. If you're looking at that poem from like a Western lens, it can seem really simple and maybe even silly, one would say. But when you look at it from the lens of the culture that came before me, then I feel like it makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, and I think like when I was coming over to India a few weeks ago, sitting down with somebody for an interview in the United States, and they were like, oh, like, what are you looking forward to? How do you feel about performing there? It's going to be your first time. And I said, I feel fantastic about it, because I know that those audiences, there's going to be an understanding there that we don't even have to speak about, but it's there, that I feel like I'm always wrestling with when I'm performing in this West, because it's like, oh, but like, wait, let me tell you, come sit down, let me explain this part and that part, but I don't need to here, because we get it on that other level. Yeah.
Yeah, I also noticed that, you know,
Thank you.
part of that is reflected in the fact that you write in small case, and that's pretty much every Indian script. It's small case. There is no such thing as capital letters.
So it's like, for example, like my identity, I feel like so many times, like a lot of the people, so I grew up in a community that's full of immigrants from all over the world. Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the world, if not the most diverse. And there's this struggle among artists, especially artists of color from, you know, other countries, that we're wrestling with this idea of identity because we're not allowed to pick it, because we're not this side and we're not that side. So we're not east or west. We're like the bridge in the middle, and we are not fully allowed to delve into the west because we're upsetting the family and the traditions that they come from. But we also don't want to fully delve and stay into those traditions, because then we're not fitting into the larger world that we're also living in. And so much of our time is spent, you know, figuring out what identity means and what we're all about. And yeah.
I did want to take this conversation to your childhood and your upbringing in Brampton, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I do have family in Brampton, and having had family in Brampton, I do know that you know, first generation, that immigrant, that experience, there is a fair bit of silence in the experience of women growing up and living in the community, and there's a lot of pressure to conform to a certain set of standards which may or may not apply as you're growing up. And yet, your poetry is so unabashedly brave. And I wanted to ask you, where did you find that courage?
So I feel like I've been so lucky to be surrounded by so many strong girlfriends and women friends throughout my life. And I was exactly how you described, extremely shy, to a point where people were like, does she even speak? And trust me, for like the first 5 years of school, I didn't even speak, and feeling so voiceless. But the universe was kind, and it gave me lots of good girlfriends. And, you know, we got close, and we just started to share stories. And suddenly, all of these issues that I thought could never happen to me or could never happen to the people that I knew, and only happened to, you know, people in the news, I suddenly realized they were happening to all of these women. You know, everybody was telling me, you know, and this is like the 7th grade, you know, my uncle did this to me, my cousin did this to me, or my uncle did this to my mom when she was like newly married and my mom has never talked about it, or my dad didn't support her and my dad blames her. And all of those conversations were the ones that we were having in middle school. And so being and having those conversations in such a safe space really gave me so much strength and power. And they were the voices that pushed me to share. So I always felt like I was sharing, but from a very safe space. And going back to my earlier point, when you're an immigrant, it's like you're neither here nor there. And so there was a moment when I felt really guilty about the fact that I only wrote poetry in English. And I was like, how can I fully explain my experiences about living in a Punjabi household or a Sikh household? How could English do justice to that? Like, can it? I don't think so. And so then I tried to write. I can read, I can write, I can speak Punjabi. So then I tried to write poetry in Punjabi for a couple of months. It was awful. Like really, really bad, like cringe-worthy. It was gross. And so then I was like, all right, let me not embarrass an entire community. Let me see if we can work through something else. And that's why I actually started to do the lowercase, because I was like, hey, if I am a mix of two worlds, why can't my English be? My English has always been a mix of two worlds. So there is no case distinction, and we only use a period. So then I just started to mess around with that and play with that as well.
So I did want to tell you that in some specific ways, I feel incredibly proud that you're as big as you are, and I'll tell you why. Because the digital space, as most of us sitting here know, it's a very English language space. It's a very white space. It's a very Western space. And if you're a woman, it's also a very blonde space. And here you are, the biggest sensation of the internet. And you're almond-eyed and black-haired and distinctly Indian. And, you know, I look at that and I just feel, wow, what a victory. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way. But as a woman of color.
Even like when the first book was originally self-published, and I thought about...
How hard was that?
Oh my goodness. For me, it was, I think it was so easy because I'm so passionate about it. And when the book was actually coming to be published, the book was already done because I was writing and writing and sharing and sharing. And then my readers were like, hey, where do we get your book from? And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't have a book. That's ridiculous. And that demand was there. And then I was like, okay, let me do it then. And so it was very responsive. And so by the time I decided to publish a book, it was done. But then when I'm like passionate about something, I just become obsessed with it. So then I ignored all of my exams and all of my school stuff. Don't do that. And I sat on my living room table, and for a full week, I swear to you, I did not cook. I did not change my clothes. I sat there. If my roommates came home and they put like minute noodles like in a bowl for me, I would like eat it. But I was designing. I was illustrating. I was obsessed with putting this thing together. And when it came to the spine, like it was so important because usually what happens is you have the full name of the author at the back. And I was like, no, like I don't want the full name. I just want the name Kaur because it represents an entire community of women. And any Kaur can then walk into a bookstore, any bookstore in Canada at the time, and that's where the book was at the time. And she can be 7 years old and she can look up and see her name on the bookshelf because I know that I never got to do that. And like how incredible and life-changing would that be for her?
Yeah, so we know that you started your career in design and you know, and I've gone through your website and some of your incredible visual work. If not poetry, then what would Rupi Kaur have poured herself into?
Oh, goodness. When I wanted to always be like a human rights lawyer. And I was always like, let's go save people. I want to save women. It's basically the stuff that I talk about. Like, I am so passionate about the trauma that I think women's bodies have to deal with and all over the world. And it's so heavy and it's so much and it's different globally, you know, from country to country. But the fact that these bodies have to carry so much just because they are this way, like that tears my heart apart. And so from a very young age, I've always been passionate about that. And luckily, you know, Amal Clooney is doing a fine job of saving the world right now. And I get to perform for all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a little bit of time for questions, so I don't want to hog all of Rupi's time. I want you to be able to ask a few questions, but before we do that, we'll have time for exactly two. But before we do that, I just wanted to say, Rupi, I was thoroughly
Thank you.
moved
I'm
by
honored
your
that you were able
performance.
to listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, two questions from the audience. They better be questions, no long paragraphs. The lady in white at the back there, please.
The mic's on its way.
So this might be a bit random, but
Speak up, please. We can't hear you.
hello. Yeah, this might be a bit random, but how do people begin to start loving themselves?
Oh, that's so heavy, but important. I think acceptance. We are so much of not loving yourself comes from comparing yourself to other people because the grass is so much greener on the other side, and it's like, they're so much happier, they have so much this. But you know what? Let me tell you one thing. Every single person in this audience right now is going through something, and it is terrible and it sucks. And you just have this one body and this one life. And this is how I see it, is like so much of my time I spent resisting and fighting that. But you're whole and you're beautiful, and the universe designed you specifically to be that way. And you have to like really hone that power and give life your all. And also, I feel like putting your energy into art and using that, whatever it is, it can be sewing a dress, it can be reading, or just whatever it is, that really helps as well. Yeah.
Last question, please. The hand in red that I see that went up way before anyone else.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
First of all, okay, I'm audible. Good evening, ma'am. First of all, I want to hear a Sat Shri Akal from your mouth.
Oh, Sat Shri Akal.
Sat Shri Akal ji. And yes, as you said, there's lot inside, and but just to cut the time, I don't know how, somehow I feel connected to you. So just there's one question which is pondering me: what brought a pen in your hand?
Ooh.
Because it's so cliched. People are like, okay, you are broken heart. When there are not 2 ears and a heart to listen, that's when you get a pen. So I would want to know from your side, what brought a pen in your hand?
It was actually a mic before it was a pen. So what happened was, I was performing. I did a lot of like youth and performances for 7 years. So like that's when I fell in love with the stage, and I loved to give speeches and all those things. And then I stopped doing the speeches, and I stopped doing the kirtan at like the local gurdwara. And then I still felt voiceless, and I've always, since I was like a young child, like there's so much I'm carrying, and I always felt so full. I felt like all this stuff that you read about, it was spilling. Like I was like a cup overflowing, but it had nowhere to go, and I had nowhere and no stage to say it to. And then like a miracle happened, because it wasn't like a decision that I took, I felt like. Because growing up, I was super, super, super shy. I would do anything to blend into a wall and be invisible. But I was getting sick of kind of living that way, because I was like, but there's so much here, and I want to, get it out. And so I saw a poster, and it said that there was an open mic happening in my local area in Brampton. And so I called up my friend. I'm like, hey, like there's this thing happening. We have nothing better to do. Let's go. And so we wrote a poem. I wrote a poem, and then we went there, and everybody was a dude, and everybody was 10 years older than us, and I performed it. And at that time, I didn't even think it was poetry. I called it storytelling, because I didn't know what spoken word poetry was. And so when I was up there and I heard my voice go throughout the room, and the way the mic picked it up, and the way all those eyes were sort of looking at me, like I felt like I had a voice. And I fell in love with that. And ever since then, I began to perform all over. And then I decided to actually put the mic down and pick up the pen and write the poetry as well that you read in the books. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You've been a fabulous audience. And could you please give it up once more for Ms. Rupi Kaur?
Thank you.